With the Pima County Sheriff's Office in Tucson in the national spotlight these days as they continue searching for Nancy Guthrie, they're also responding to some discrepancies reported in the sheriff's own past work history.
The top cop heading up the Nancy Guthrie investigation was just exposed for lying. It has nothing to do with the kidnapping, but rather a massive personal secret he has kept buried for more than 40 years. Newly uncovered documents reveal he was actually pushed out of his previous law enforcement gig, and the details surrounding his exit cast serious doubt on his handling of this current kidnapping case from day one. Confronted by reporters regarding the scandal, he offered zero denials and provided zero explanations. He simply uttered a 6-word response. And once you hear that specific phrase, you will instantly realize why this entire investigation is completely derailed. Before diving into the Arizona Republic's explosive findings, we need to quickly review the current status of the investigation. We will skip the basic details you have already seen on the news so we do not waste your time. 39 days have passed since 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie was snatched from her Catalina Foothills residence in Tucson during the early hours of February 1st. Investigators have already verified that the blood found on the front patio belongs to her. The perpetrator completely ripped off her doorbell camera. The data from her medical pacemaker went completely dead at exactly 2:28 in the morning. Security footage captured an armed suspect wearing a mask and lugging a Walmart bag. Authorities have combed through thousands of hours of surveillance tape and fielded tens of thousands of leads, while the family put up a $1 million bounty alongside a $100,000 FBI reward. Yet here we are 39 days later with absolutely zero criminal charges filed. Officials have not released a suspect's name and are nowhere near making an arrest, even though the local point man for the case, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, recently claimed to NBC News that detectives are making real headway. An interviewer asked the sheriff if his team was getting any closer to tracking down the kidnappers 30 days after Nancy Guthrie vanished. He simply replied that his detectives were definitely getting closer. He has been feeding the press that exact same line since the second week of the search. He refuses to provide a clear timeline or any concrete details, insisting only that they are getting warmer. Keeping all of that background in mind, we need to discuss the bombshell report the Arizona Republic just dropped. Once you grasp the severity of these leaked records, your entire perspective on how this case has been handled will shift forever. The newspaper managed to get their hands on legitimate government paperwork, meaning this is not just baseless internet gossip or shady insider tips. These files prove that Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, the guy constantly giving interviews on NBC, Fox News, and The Today Show since the search began, was actually booted from his previous policing job. He didn't just casually retire or take a new gig, but was rather kicked out of the department without ever breathing a word of it to the public. He has kept this dark secret under wraps for over 40 years. At first glance, his resume reads like a textbook career trajectory for a dedicated cop who put in his time in Tucson and climbed the organizational ladder. He successfully campaigned for the top law enforcement spot in Pima County. That victory turned him into the lead representative for an agency responsible for policing more than 9,000 square miles of arid southern Arizona terrain. As soon as the nation's most high-profile abduction occurred on his turf, he immediately embraced the media spotlight. However, well before his stint in Tucson, he worked as a street cop for the El Paso Police Department over in Texas during the late 1970s and early 1980s. That specific chunk of his employment history is no secret. He proudly lists it on his professional curriculum vitae and official bio. Throughout his political campaigns in Pima County, he constantly highlighted his early policing days during media interviews. Yet he completely scrubbed the true story of his departure from the El Paso force from his resume, keeping it totally hidden until reporters started digging into his past. The newly unearthed records clearly indicate that the sheriff's exit from the Texas police force was far from voluntary. He definitely did not quietly run out the clock on his contract or hand in a polite 2-week notice before heading out of town. The paperwork states he stepped down in lieu of getting fired. Quitting to avoid termination is just administrative doublespeak used by police agencies right before they officially sack an officer. It offers the disgraced cop a small window to pack up their desk voluntarily so they do not have a formal firing on their permanent record. The guy opted to pack his bags and leave. Before going any further, we need to take a second and break down what that kind of departure truly signifies in the policing world. Law enforcement agencies generate massive mountains of internal paperwork compared to almost any other American workplace. Every single civilian grievance, written warning, unpaid suspension, or physical altercation is meticulously logged in a personnel file. Officers have to go through complex disciplinary hearings and internal affairs investigations before any drastic action is taken. Reaching the stage where the brass actually wants to fire someone implies their rap sheet is overflowing with severe violations. The leadership essentially made a final ruling on his employment. Letting a bad cop resign instead of firing them is rarely done out of the goodness of the chief's heart. It is a highly strategic maneuver designed to get rid of a problem employee without dragging the city through a messy union appeal. The bad apple leaves the precinct, the personnel files get shoved in a cabinet, and the general public stays entirely in the dark unless a journalist goes digging. The official documents list his termination date as 1982. Meanwhile, his personal job history claims he stuck around El Paso until 1984. He completely fabricated 2 entire years of his work history. Shockingly, absolutely no one picked up on the discrepancy during his 4 decades working as an Arizona cop and elected official, or perhaps they simply looked the other way. We need to dissect exactly what those internal affairs files contained. We are not talking about an isolated mistake. This goes way beyond a single lapse in judgment from an otherwise stellar patrolman. We are looking at a deeply ingrained behavioral pattern, which is the most accurate indicator of a person's true character. The newspaper's findings highlight numerous write-ups during his stint in Texas, starting with blatant insubordination. He actively defied commands from his commanding officers, which is a massive red flag in a paramilitary organization that relies heavily on strict hierarchies. Ignoring orders is a fundamental failure that proves a guy cannot operate within a heavily structured team. And then came the excessive force allegations. These violence complaints are a huge deal for a couple of reasons. They paint a disturbing picture of his street-level policing tactics, while also providing critical context for how he is currently managing the Guthrie investigation. It shines a spotlight on his sheer refusal to take responsibility for his actions. When management disciplines a patrolman for roughing up suspects, they are officially warning him that his abusive behavior will no longer be tolerated. You really have to see if the guy actually changes his behavior after a warning, but he followed it up by firing his weapon in a completely separate, unauthorized incident. That unauthorized discharge got its own distinct write-up in his personnel file, right alongside citations for illegal off-duty gambling. The underground betting was flagged as a major independent violation. It had nothing to do with undercover police work or minor administrative errors, but was instead illegal personal behavior that internal affairs felt compelled to punish. He also had a nasty habit of showing up late to his shifts, a problem documented so frequently that his supervisors put it in writing. Yet the most devastating accusation in the entire file is a specific phrase that summarizes his overall work ethic. The phrasing illustrates a complete failure to do the job properly over a long stretch of time. His superiors literally stamped his file with the official label of consistent inefficiency, which is a brutally honest assessment. That specific terminology speaks volumes about his character. We aren't talking about a temporary slump or a brief string of bad luck. It proves that several different supervisors tracked his awful performance across countless evaluations and finally decided to paper his file. Let's transition to the major event that ultimately ended his Texas career. The files show he took a 15-day unpaid suspension after seriously hurting a robbery suspect while making an arrest. Losing 15 days of wages is a massive disciplinary blow. We are not talking about a slap on the wrist or a sternly worded memo. Getting docked 15 days of pay for a botched arrest is incredibly severe, especially since the ensuing fallout escalated all the way to a grand jury hearing. A panel of jurors had to review the facts surrounding the suspect's injuries, though they eventually decided not to issue a formal indictment. Thanks to that decision, the disgraced cop managed to dodge criminal charges and avoid a nasty trial. Even so, Having your actions scrutinized by a grand jury for potential felony charges is a massive red flag. It was simply the cherry on top of an already disastrous personnel file. Once you compile his refusal to follow orders, the brutal use of force, the underground betting, his inability to show up on time, his utter incompetence, and the grand jury investigation over a battered suspect, the picture becomes incredibly clear. You are staring at the employment history of a rogue cop whose bosses spent years compiling enough evidence to fire him. By the time 1982 rolled around, they finally pulled the trigger. He racked up a total of 37 unpaid suspension days during his stint with the El Paso Police Department. Yet, the detail that truly sticks with you long after forgetting the rest of his disciplinary file is this. Chris Nanos actually quit the El Paso force in 1982. However, his resume claimed he left in 1984. That leaves a glaring 2-year hole. For more than 40 years, spanning his whole career in Tucson law enforcement, his sheriff campaigns, elections, and countless media interviews, that glaring discrepancy just sat there completely ignored, without a single question asked or answered. Not one person bothered to check the facts. Not a single soul dug into those El Paso files. No one questioned why a guy boasting about his public service career, campaigning heavily on his police background, and currently leading one of the biggest sheriff's offices in the nation, conveniently forgot to mention that he was basically forced out of his previous gig before moving to Tucson. Based on coverage by Newsweek, Nanos took a job as a corrections officer with the Puma County Sheriff's Department in 1984, which conveniently aligns with the fabricated El Paso exit date on his resume. The undeniable truth is that this missing time is real. It is an undisputed fact that the timeline on his job history completely contradicts the actual documents from the El Paso police. Furthermore, we recognize that the very individual with a doctored professional history is the exact same guy getting on national television every single week, swearing he is inching closer to cracking the Nancy Guthrie missing person case. Every single time he took the stage at those press briefings, he carried that hidden history with him. Absolutely no one was the wiser. Eventually, the Arizona Republic reached out to Nanos to get his side of the story. After they revealed their discoveries, handed him the official paperwork, and offered him a fair chance to clear up a 40-year-old discrepancy on his work history, he could have taken several different paths. He had the option to just be completely honest. He might have simply owned up to what the documents proved. Providing some much-needed background would have been an easy out. He easily could have admitted to youthful indiscretions, owned his past blunders, and pointed out that his decades of solid work in Tucson were proof of his growth. Any of those reactions would have given folks something to digest, debate, or simply accept before putting the whole thing behind them. Instead, his direct written reply was, "Is this really your pressing issue? Are you absolutely positive you don't want to dig into my high school days and find out why the principal paddled me? Best of luck publishing your little smear campaign." That was his exact verbatim reply to a major publication inquiring about verified work history, rather than idle chatter, hearsay, or personal biases, but actual concrete paperwork proving his personal resume blatantly lied about his departure date and the actual reasons he was pushed out of his last job. His immediate reaction was to just laugh off the inquiry entirely, equating serious professional misconduct to getting in trouble as a kid, while spinning a legitimate journalistic question based on public data as nothing more than a malicious attack. Keep in mind, this is the exact same lawman serving as the lead spokesperson for the hunt for an 84-year-old lady who was snatched right out of her house during the dead of night. Yet, the moment seasoned journalists from a massive Arizona publication confronted him with a straightforward question regarding his perfectly documented career timeline, he brushed it off as a targeted smear and refused to engage. However, things did not just stop there, mainly because following that defensive outburst, the Puma County Sheriff's Department made a move that clearly proved how completely, totally unjustifiable his initial stance really was. They ended up caving completely. Once the Arizona Republic actually dropped their investigative piece, the Puma County Sheriff's Department scrambled to issue a formal response. They completely avoided disputing the actual files. No one there even tried to push back against the journalist's claims. At no point did they accuse the newspaper of making things up. Instead, their official excuse sounded exactly like this. The completely wrong timeline on the sheriff's professional profile was simply caused by 2 minor administrative slip-ups. Yes, 2 minor paperwork mistakes. His paperwork claimed he finished up at the El Paso Police Department in 1984. Meanwhile, the actual files prove it happened in 1982. You cannot just write that off as a typo, a glitch in the layout, or some careless copying and pasting blunder. 1982 is fundamentally different from 1984. There is a massive 2-year gap between them. That is an entire block of time where, based on the concrete evidence, Chris Nanos was completely gone from that police force. And the actual reasons for his exit, if he had actually been honest about them on paper, absolutely would have demanded a serious conversation. The department has naturally gone back and fixed his bio by now, but during that process, they casually confessed to another mistake that the newspaper had not even caught. The document originally claimed he made captain in 2009. The real promotion date was actually 2007. That makes 2 distinct timeline issues, 2 major blunders, both of which were swept under the rug as simple filing mistakes. They sneakily tweaked the document while dropping a quick press release blaming a 40-year lie on bad typing, hoping everyone would just look the other way. Now, this matters way beyond just making sure a job application is perfectly honest. The real issue here is what this behavior exposes regarding the department's absolute refusal to take any real responsibility for their actions. Confronted with hard proof that completely destroys their carefully crafted narrative, their immediate reaction lacked any shred of honesty, openness, or even a remotely believable excuse. Instead, they basically just shrugged it off as a simple typo and secretly fixed the paperwork. If dodging the truth like that rings a bell, it honestly ought to, considering we have seen this exact same evasive tactic play out repeatedly during the search for Nancy Guthrie. For those of you tuning in who have been closely tracking this mystery from day one, you probably already have a decent idea of where this next part is heading. Hang tight though, because we are about to frame this in a way that will completely blow your mind. All the blunders we are about to list take on a whole new meaning once you realize exactly who was running the show and calling the shots. By the way, if you are new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. We dive into every single detail of this mystery using only verified evidence instead of wild rumors. Plus, our upcoming deep dive pushes things even further. Our goal is to give you the complete picture. There is actually another soundbite from Nanos that, when paired with the newspaper's recent discoveries, stops sounding like a careless comment and feels way more like a guy slipping up and telling on himself. Way back on February 3rd, 2026, right at the start of the search when media was swarming and the heat was really turning up, Nanos dropped this gem during a briefing. He openly admitted that he just was not accustomed to people actually scrutinizing his statements and demanding he take responsibility for them. This guy literally said that out loud during a massive nationwide manhunt, right when millions of viewers were glued to their screens dissecting every tiny detail, praying for any sign of an 84-year-old grandmother who was abducted right out of her own living room. He flat out confessed that taking responsibility is just not something he is used to. If you look at that sentence all by itself, it might just seem like an awkward way of saying the press spotlight is super intense. The average person would probably let that slide without a second thought. However, try looking at it with everything we know today. Think about it in light of the El Paso files, his fake 1984 exit date that was actually 1982, the whole administrative glitch excuse, and his snarky comments about a smear campaign. Take another look at that quote. It definitely is not just a poor choice of words. That statement perfectly sums up the guy's exact mindset for the last 40 years. Nobody has ever made Chris Nanos face the music, whether it was his messy exit in Texas or the massive lie sitting right on his job application. You could also easily argue that he keeps getting a free pass for the countless massive blunders his team made while working this exact case. The very next morning, after Nancy Guthrie vanished into thin air, her property was completely locked down as an active investigation zone. Walking through her place, it was incredibly obvious that something terrible went down, from the smeared blood and the ripped-off security camera to all of her daily stuff sitting untouched from the exact moment she was grabbed. Under no circumstances should random people have been allowed anywhere near that location. But if you look at the coverage from various news teams, naturally, including the Arizona Republic, things went totally sideways. The police did such an unbelievably terrible job of taping off the area that random journalists literally strolled right up to Nancy Guthrie's house and clearly spotted her blood smeared across the front steps. Let that sink in. Reporters were just casually staring at the victim's blood. When the press finally grilled him about this massive screw-up on February 5th, Nanos actually confessed to it. He admitted that if he could magically turn back time, he would have kept the area taped off way longer. His excuse was simply that his deputies figured they had already collected everything they needed. Locking down an incident area is quite literally law enforcement one-on-one, and it absolutely has to happen before you start dusting for prints, talking to witnesses, or chatting with the media. Your top priority is locking it down completely. You have to establish a hard boundary. Keeping unauthorized people far away from crucial clues is your entire job. Clearly, they totally dropped the ball on that one. And the guy in charge of the team that completely failed to protect that property was none other than Chris Nanos. At one very particular point in the search, right when Nancy Guthrie's heartbroken relatives were going on television to beg the kidnapper for her safe return, Chris Nanos was busy chilling at a college basketball game. The news broke about his little outing, and it quickly started painting a pretty terrible picture of the guy. Now, you could absolutely make a fair point that cops need downtime, that the boss has a life outside of work, and that kicking back at a sports arena does not automatically mean he is ignoring his duties. We can totally concede all those points, but public perception is a massive deal. The visual of the head cop enjoying a basketball game while the family of a missing person under his watch is bawling their eyes out on national television is absolutely brutal. A bad look like that really makes you question his core priorities, his overall self-awareness, and whether the guy running the entire operation even remotely understands the sheer devastation this tragedy has caused the family. From day one of this living nightmare, the Guthrie family has carried themselves with absolute grace and class. Not once have they gone to the press to trash the police work. They have played by the rules and helped out every step of the way. Putting up $1 million out of their personal funds is a huge gesture. Even with whatever private doubts they might hold, the family has refrained from throwing around accusations. Still, holding back on blame hardly implies we ought to stop demanding answers. Ultimately, the responsibility of pressing for the truth falls on others. In the initial phase of the inquiry, investigators managed to collect genetic material right at the house and throughout the nearby vicinity. Later updates revealed that a few of these genetic swabs turned out to be incredibly complicated. The lab found jumbled genetic markers belonging to several different people, which absolutely demanded highly specialized extraction methods. Whenever forensic teams encounter such delicate and tangled material, the usual protocol dictates shipping it straight to the Federal Bureau's facility in Quantico, Virginia. That specific lab boasts the cutting-edge gear, exclusive records access, and specialized knowledge designed to crack the nation's toughest scientific mysteries. Yet the sheriff completely bypassed the federal route. Instead, he opted to mail the materials off to a commercial testing center called DNA Labs International, situated down in Deerfield Beach, Florida. Outspoken crime scene specialists openly blasted this controversial choice in the media. Dealing with forensic clues in such a massively publicized mystery requires absolute perfection, especially considering an older lady was snatched right from her residence by an unknown predator who left behind shady extortion letters while the whole nation watched. Under those extreme circumstances, tapping into the absolute best tools on the market is basically mandatory. The federal facility over in Virginia serves as the ultimate gold standard for massive national investigations. They maintain unhindered entry into nationwide criminal registries and possess analytical power that independent testing facilities simply cannot replicate. Think about the real-world implications of that gap in capability. Untangling a genetic cocktail left by numerous people takes a degree of isolation and scrutiny that practically begs for top-tier government equipment. The swiftest way to tap into CODIS, the National Genetic Index run by the Bureau, involves going directly through government scientists. Should the intruder's genetic footprint already exist inside any police system nationwide, utilizing federal avenues guarantees the quickest possible identification. Despite all that, the local boss chose an alternate path. That move simply added another confusing layer to a growing pile of baffling choices made throughout the probe that left the public scratching their heads. Furthermore, an additional early incident warrants deeper scrutiny since it strikes right at the heart of operational integrity and discipline. The head of Pima County Law Enforcement, Chris Nanos, openly declared the victim's entire family completely innocent of any involvement. Bizarrely, he broadcasted their exoneration well before the forensic reports from the house ever materialized. He literally made the call before looking at the science, not after. Running any sort of police inquiry, let alone a multi-layered mystery like this, means following a very strict order of operations. Detectives must collect the clues first, then experts analyze the materials. Finally, the team builds their theories based strictly on those scientific findings. The workflow is supposed to move in one distinct direction. Concrete findings must always drive the final verdict. Publicly absolving someone prior to reviewing facts that might either back up or destroy that innocence completely violates basic police protocol. Making that call was wildly rushed, to say the very least. Regardless of the motive, it broadcasts a concerning message that officials are steering this massive hunt using gut feelings rather than hard physical facts. To be completely fair, the relatives have played ball with detectives from day one. In the end, the official probe's delayed scientific reports did indeed prove their absolute innocence. Nobody is trying to cast doubt on their innocence, but jumping the gun to exonerate them prior to testing completion raises massive red flags regarding the department's underlying methodology. As we list the growing concerns surrounding the sheriff's management of this crisis, a single incredibly serious allegation towers above the rest. People claimed he actively kept crucial clues away from federal agents. Naturally, he firmly rejected the rumor. Speaking directly with the local NBC station, KVOA, he vehemently insisted the rumor lacked any factual basis whatsoever. Just to keep the record totally transparent about verified facts versus speculation, Reuters published the bombshell claim while the department forcefully pushed back. Currently, nobody has offered concrete proof proving clues were actually hidden away. All we are looking at is a journalist's claim paired with a law enforcement rebuttal. Right now, that sums up the entire verifiable truth regarding this particular dispute. However, when you zoom out and view the broader picture, which includes the commercial testing choice, the rushed exonerations, and the unsecured property, even an unproven allegation carries weight. These claims do not just float around in empty space. Instead, the rumor perfectly aligns with a series of questionable moves that reporters have already verified. Once a solid trend emerges, brushing off a new complaint becomes significantly more difficult. Should this discussion spark your curiosity regarding the physical clues, the kidnapper's psychological makeup, or the neighborhood network crash, our page features deep dives into each of those topics. You can find all the necessary video URLs down below. Go ahead and smash the thumbs up if you believe we need to keep pushing hard for transparency. Bashing the sheriff's handling of the crisis is not just a favorite pastime for external critics, because his own officers are sounding the alarm too. The man leading the Pima County Deputies Organization, Sergeant Aaron Cross, stepped up and shared his thoughts with the New York Post amid the chaos. He essentially speaks on behalf of the very men and women patrolling the streets for the sheriff. Cross claimed the boss was using the hunt for Nancy Guthrie to stroke his own vanity. Let that sink in, because those are his exact words, not a media spin. The chosen leader of the patrolmen's union literally accused his commander of treating a massive federal abduction as a vanity project. You cannot wave that off as a hit job from an armchair detective. That brutal assessment came straight from his own precinct. Furthermore, the union boss had plenty more to say. The United Cajun Navy offered a massive 41-page action plan featuring heat-tracking copters, 25 tracking dogs, and organized wilderness patrols, but the sheriff flatly rejected them. Cross openly blasted the refusal, arguing that turning away free manpower makes zero tactical sense. The massive divide between a boss demanding isolation and his top sergeant begging for reinforcements speaks volumes. It really highlights the massive internal friction tearing the department apart behind closed doors. From day one, the head lawman has constantly painted himself as the ultimate, unquestionable source of truth. He continues to sit down for press chats on a regular basis. He keeps bragging about narrowing the gap, securing fresh tips, and maintaining flawless operational control. Every single time he commands a podium, he is quietly feeding the public a very specific narrative. He essentially demands absolute blind faith in his leadership, his deputies, and his methods. However, a massive exposé by the Arizona Republic begs a rather straightforward question. Why on earth should anyone rely on a leader caught padding his professional background for 40 decades, especially when his only defense against the lying accusations was writing it off as a media smear campaign? Let us refocus on the current reality of the timeline. We are currently 39 days into the nightmare, right? We must remember that his fabricated work history is not the central crime here. Instead, his sketchy past merely provides a lens for analyzing his current investigative blunders. Meanwhile, Nancy Guthrie remains utterly vanished. Just a few days ago, detectives announced they were inspecting a busted electrical cabinet located mere steps away from the victim's property. That vandalized equipment might explain the sudden broadband failure that struck on the evening of February 1st. Locals claim the blackout completely knocked out their security cameras right as the kidnapping unfolded. Consequently, federal operatives and county deputies canvassed the Catalina Foothills community on March 5th with a pair of highly targeted inquiries. Initially, they wanted to know if anyone experienced Wi-Fi drops late on February 1st. Furthermore, they shockingly asked residents to hand over any camera recordings from January 11th, which was 3 full weeks prior to the abduction. The police remained completely tight-lipped regarding their sudden interest in that older date. Yet shifting the focus to mid-January while actively probing a February blackout strongly hints at a major breakthrough. They likely spotted a critical incident from weeks prior that directly links to the eventual break-in. This points heavily toward early scouting missions, potential staking out of the local streets, or the attacker doing dry runs long before they actually snatched her. A local resident named Aldine, residing up in the foothills, chatted with Brian Entin on a video podcast about a creepy encounter. She vividly recalled spotting a strange guy hovering near Nancy's property several weeks prior to the tragic event. The witness claimed the guy practically screamed suspicious right away. He was rocking casual urban gear, slouching heavily, hiding his face under a brim, and creeping along while aggressively glaring at houses, especially the target's place. The man looked totally out of place in that kind of upscale area, she noted. When you live in a secluded spot where unfamiliar faces stick out like sore thumbs, a creeping lurker grabs your attention fast. She pinned the terrifying encounter right around January 11th, just days past her January 8th birthday celebration. Assuming the neighbor's memory holds up, it completely validates the primary police theory. The abduction was absolutely premeditated, rather than a crime of opportunity. The monster who grabbed Nancy Guthrie did their homework and mapped out the area flawlessly. The culprit likely scouted the layout multiple times beforehand. They clearly possessed the technical know-how to cripple the local network grids right before kicking off their assault. The attacker even managed to tear down the front porch lens entirely. Striking during the dead of night on a weekend was a highly tactical move. The intruder knew her scheduled virtual church viewing would buy them at least 12 to 14 hours of pure freedom before anyone raised the alarm. Federal agents have openly admitted that incoming leads have slowed to a crawl compared to the early rush. Still, the government's $100,000 bounty is totally valid and waiting. The family's massive $1 million incentive also stands firm, while the local Tucson Crime Stoppers program has thrown even more cash into the pot. They are offering well over $1 million for a solid tip. Yet law enforcement still lacks the concrete leads needed to put somebody in handcuffs. Even that blended genetic material collected at the house failed to generate any solid hits inside the national database. Those hand coverings discovered about 6 feet from the property belonged to a local food service employee completely unrelated to this ordeal. Authorities still haven't tracked down that vehicle caught on doorbell video around 2:36 in the morning, even after analyzing countless similar models. Furthermore, that weird one-size-fits-all weapon sheath hasn't pointed detectives toward a viable suspect either. Nobody has figured out who purchased that retail store knapsack. Make no mistake, this probe is still incredibly active. Detectives refuse to throw in the towel. Federal agents out of Phoenix remain heavily involved in the hunt. Lab technicians are still processing items, but 39 days feels like an eternity in the criminal justice world. And as the clock keeps ticking without answers, people start questioning the integrity of the collected materials. Suddenly, the spotlight shifts onto how the police are actually handling the probe. We really need to call out exactly why this entire dragnet hit a massive brick wall. During any kidnapping situation, the clues gathered within that crucial initial 72-hour window are the absolute gold standard for solving the mystery. You have untouched bodily fluids, brand new security tape, bystander recollections that haven't been warped by the evening news, and a perfectly preserved area completely unaffected by the elements. Every single one of those elements is incredibly pristine during those first 3 days. The entire trajectory of the manhunt hinges entirely on how effectively detectives maximize that tight time frame. If law enforcement squanders that golden opportunity, those missed clues are gone forever. The task force is forced to just pivot and manage the fallout. Now, the intense glare surrounding Chris Nanos goes way deeper than this particular disappearance. Just a few weeks ago, someone locked up in the Pima County Jail slapped the top cop and his agency with a federal civil rights complaint. To be perfectly clear, we aren't claiming that this current legal battle ties right back to the Guthrie situation. However, it paints a rather disturbing portrait of a sheriff currently battling massive trust issues coming from every possible angle, including his own rank and file, local judges, the community, and relentless reporters. Sure, somebody can juggle absolute chaos and still be highly qualified for their leadership role. That definitely happens sometimes. However, we are dealing with a guy who was basically chased out of his previous policing gig, lied about his employment timeline for 40 solid years, dismisses incredibly valid reporter inquiries by sarcastically wishing them luck on their smear campaigns, and openly admits he despises answering to anyone. Someone like that doesn't just get a free pass or blind trust. He needs to prove he deserves it. We need to set the record entirely straight here. Nobody is accusing Chris Nanos of kidnapping Nancy Guthrie. Furthermore, we aren't claiming his rocky history down in El Paso completely ruins his ability to work in law enforcement today. We also aren't declaring that this entire manhunt has been a complete disaster from day one, mainly because we have elite federal profilers and top-tier lab techs working behind closed doors, and they could literally be inches away from cracking this thing wide open without tipping off the press. Here is our actual point. The top brass running the local jurisdiction for this massive search has been skating by on a massive cover-up, using a fake timeline on his curriculum vitae, and staying totally mute for 4 decades regarding why he actually departed his last uniform patrol gig. This deception wasn't uncovered through a sudden burst of conscience on his end. The truth only surfaced after investigative reporters dug up the actual municipal paperwork. When asked to explain the paper trail, he basically scoffed at the journalists. Then, his public relations team tried to brush off a massive 24-month gap in his professional timeline as a simple typing mistake. Keep in mind, Nancy Guthrie is 84 years of age. The woman struggles to get around on her own. She requires crucial prescription drugs every single day. She has been gone without a trace for 39 agonizing days. Her loved ones have completely uprooted their routines to camp out in Arizona, desperately hunting for any glimmer of hope. In fact, her child flew back to the New York broadcasting desk just to embrace her colleagues before catching the very next flight out west, knowing full well that the desert is where this nightmare has to end. The glaring issue that local politicians and top cops in Tucson are absolutely terrified to vocalize is the exact same thing every armchair detective has been wondering for nearly a month. Looking at the massive blunders happening under his direct supervision right now, like the completely unsealed perimeter, farming out tests to unvetted facilities, hastily ruling out suspects, chilling at a sporting event, allegedly hiding crucial files, and all that newly unearthed baggage from his past, can anybody honestly say Chris Nanos should be spearheading this manhunt? Does anybody holding actual power in Arizona, whether it is the state capitol, federal directors, or the Pima County commissioners, possess the guts to heavily scrutinize his fitness for duty behind closed doors? And if they aren't, what exactly is stopping them? Those sitting in high-level seats are keeping their mouths completely shut in front of the cameras. Meanwhile, the relatives are forced to bite their tongues just to stay on the good side of the very people looking for their matriarch. The sheriff has practically shouted from the rooftops that he thinks answering to the public is entirely beneath his pay grade. Regardless, that intense pressure only skyrockets with each passing week that a suspect remains on the loose. Each time a collected item gets mishandled in the logbook, it adds fuel to the fire. Every single moment a seasoned professional spots a glaring procedural mistake just screams pure incompetence, regardless of whether local officials want to admit the harsh truth. Looking back at this 39-day circus, with all the media briefings, hotline updates, empty promises about breaking the case, so-called paperwork glitches, and blaming the press, it becomes painfully obvious that the core problem goes way beyond basic police work. This is a massive moral rot stemming straight from the very top of the food chain. We are talking about severe ethical flaws exposed back in El Paso during 1982, a disturbing pattern of behavior that hasn't changed a bit in decades. Through all this madness, Nancy Guthrie's relatives have shown incredible class. They haven't blasted the police force on national television at all. Instead, they have played by the rules and collaborated with authorities. They brought in outside help, begged the community for tips, slapped massive bounties on information, and made sure the story stayed front and center. Those incredible efforts absolutely warrant a police response led by someone who isn't hiding a completely fabricated 40-year-old employment record. That family has earned way more respect than a dismissive comment about a media witch hunt. Anyone who watches our content regularly knows we dive headfirst into the controversial stuff. The internet is absolutely flooding with wild theories regarding the kidnapper's identity and motives. Rest assured, we plan to break down every single one of those angles. We will unpack the neighborhood network outages, dissect the psychological traits of the perpetrator, analyze the handwriting on the extortion letter, tackle the weird January 11th timeline, and investigate the signal blocker rumors, leaving no stone unturned. Before we jump down those rabbit holes, though, we had to address this massive elephant in the room because a solid groundwork is crucial for any successful manhunt. The person calling the shots is a huge deal. Their track record carries serious weight. If you learned something totally unexpected today, especially regarding those old El Paso documents, the internal affairs complaints, or the glaring difference between his actual quitting date and his shiny resume, please send this link to your friends. Pushing for real answers becomes vastly more effective for the Guthrie crew when a massive crowd starts screaming the exact same tough questions until those in power are forced to listen. Sound off in the replies below and tell us which specific skeleton in Nanos's closet completely ruins his credibility. I make sure to scroll through every single piece of feedback. Also, if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, smash it right now and ring the notification bell. In our upcoming deep dive, we are going to dissect the physical clues, examine that suspicious camera glitch, and map out exactly how detectives can actually put this puzzle together. Nancy Guthrie definitely earned that much from us. Her loved ones are owed some closure, and the truth is still hiding out there somewhere waiting to be found. This story reminds us of a painful but necessary truth. Trust must be earned, especially by those who hold power over the lives of others. When a family is suffering, when a vulnerable elderly woman is missing, and when the public is desperate for answers, leadership cannot survive on vague promises, excuses, or hidden truths. It must stand on honesty, accountability, and courage. The deeper lesson here is not only about one investigation. It is about the danger of silence, the cost of carelessness, and the harm that comes when pride becomes more important than responsibility. A single lie may seem buried for years, but the truth has a way of rising when people need it most. And when it does, it can shake the faith of an entire community. This is why transparency matters. This is why integrity matters. This is why every family in pain deserves more than sympathy. They deserve competence, urgency, and respect. In moments of crisis, character is revealed, not invented. Real leaders do not hide behind titles. They answer hard questions. They protect the vulnerable. They admit mistakes. And above all, they remember that behind every headline is a human life, a grieving family, and a truth that still deserves to be found.